Hi everyone, William here with the latest installment of the Grand Duke Dmitri YouTube series. We're doing another letter, but a much different time period. With these clouds behind me, I look rather celestial, don't I? But not so much with the baseball cap on. Okay, so what we are doing today. Well, first let's do our recap. So we finished up a letter of 7th February 1910. That's an old style date, Julian calendar. And Dmitri talked about his social life. He was getting used to living in Petersburg and having an active social life. He and Maria had been fairly isolated when they lived in Moscow. He was preparing, it sounds like, pretty intensively for steeplechasing. He'd already participated in one and won second place. And, you know, the Olympics were coming up in less than 2 years. Or a little more than 2 years, because it would have been summer. Okay, so, and he talked about the rivalry between the two empresses, the Dowager Empress Maria Fyodorovna and the current Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, and how Maria Fyodorovna had moved to St. Petersburg and was making lots of appearances at various charitable institutions and at charitable events at the theaters, and it was really getting on Alexandra's nerves. Okay, so as I said, we're embarking on something new this time because I'm here at Chatzal, and because I and my collaborator Larry App will be making a third video in our biographical Dmitri series, and it will be the last one, the one that covers his life at Chatzal. I decided to sort of kill two birds with one stone and start doing the Chatzal material for these videos. So, but we're not doing diaries today. Dmitri did keep a diary while he was here, but today we're doing another letter, and it's dated 23rd of September 1939. Dmitri arrived in Davos on the 1st of September 1939, the very day of the German invasion of Poland. And then he stayed at a hotel called the Angleterre and went then on checked in and became a permanent resident at Chatzal until he died on the 2nd September. And so he's settled in a little. Now it's the 23rd. This is not the Julian calendar, it's the Gregorian calendar. And he's writing this letter to his sister, and he's writing it on Chatzal stationery. I'm sorry I don't have a photo of it for you. That says Chatzal Grisson Suisse. So it's the French version. In German it would be Chatzal Graubünden Schweiz. Okay. And he's doing something interesting with this letter. He's writing it in the normal way one would a letter, horizontally across the page, but then along the sides and at the top and in various places, he's squeezing in these comments, these disparaging comments that, you know, they're imaginary pretty much. He's imagining what the people, the emigres back in France are saying about him, and he's imagining them saying nasty things. So here's how he puts that. This is at the top before he started the body of the letter. He says, in a few places I have written what they are probably saying about me in emigre circles. And then he puts in quotes, D. Pav is out of commission. He's gravely ill and will be incapacitated for a long time. You need to place your bets elsewhere. That's probably what the Young Russia Party is saying. Okay, so we'll talk about that when we're done with the letter. And now let's start. We're going to be doing this letter in parts because it's quite a long one. So let's start. My dear one, God only knows when this letter will reach you, though it seems the Italian ocean liners are still sailing. Now you know why I have written you so rarely, or to be truthful, not at all, up to this point. It was because of a silly feeling on my part that the whole exercise would be pointless, given how much the circumstances might have changed by the time the letter even reached you. But now I can pretty safely state that the war will still be going on 2 weeks from now, and I'll still be here in Davos, so nothing will have changed all that much. I'll begin at the beginning, exclamation point. You have no idea how terrible I felt during those last few days in Paris and the last 2 weeks in Torquay. But I tried as much as possible to conceal it. I hope I wasn't too unsuccessful. It was only at night when I was alone that I got scared. And he underlines that, I got scared, and couldn't help feeling sorry for myself. The worst moment was when Polly left. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that I might never see him again, double exclamation point. Oddly, I was seized by the same feeling when the moment came for us to part from one another after dinner at poor Pauline's. It was worse, much worse, than what I had felt going off to war in 1914. A resolve came over me, stubborn and strong, to do everything I could to pull through, exclamation point. And pull through is written in English. In Latin letters, it's the English pull through. But resolve is one thing, and going home every night to spit up, forgive me, in parentheses, rotten, stinking, and weirdly cadaverous pus is quite another. I was gripped by fear. That's underlined and with an exclamation point. Fear that the time had come to lay down my fevered head, double exclamation point. And then again, that strange and blind feeling that the everlasting power of good will pull me through. So this whole paragraph and the next one are in English. So, and then again, that strange and blind feeling that the everlasting power of good will pull me through. And the everlasting power of good and will pull me through is all underlined. If only I never leave for 1 second, either to pump on it or let myself slip into a state of apathy and indifference. Triple exclamation points. Something of this sort was put in my soul by the Hindu doctor, I am sure. Exclamation point, there on the Red Sea. Okay, so much interesting. This is only a little part of the letter, and yet I probably should have done a shorter section. So, as you know, there was, and to some extent still is, especially in certain places, a terrible stigma attached to tuberculosis. And Dmitri, it seems, is being a little paranoid here and thinking about how people are kind of looking down their nose at him as someone who's suffering from tuberculosis. And you'll see that more explicitly later. Here, what he seems to be talking about when he imagines people saying Dmitri Pavlovich is out of commission, he's gravely ill, so you need to place your bets elsewhere. And he's saying that this isn't just the emigre community in general, but specifically the Young Russia Party saying this. And as you know, if you watched the episodes that talked about the letters, the letter that Grunwald wrote to Maria describing Dmitri's activities and how he'd given these press interviews saying that the Romanovs will never, ever collaborate with the Nazis. And he'd been, very politically active. And so now he imagines people saying he's out of the picture. You need to place your bets elsewhere. Interesting way of putting it for a compulsive gambler. Anyway, so his fellow activists in the Young Russia Party, he imagines them saying this. Yeah, okay. And it's interesting when he says the reason he hasn't written to Maria. I mean, these are some fascinating things, because he thought the assumption is that the war's not really gonna, things will settle down in Poland and there's not really gonna be a war. And the other assumption being that he would not have to stay very long in Davos. Either that, or possibly he's assuming that he'd be dead within 2 weeks. Either way, he didn't think that, it was worth writing, because by the time Maria got the letter in 2 weeks, things would be completely different, and he would not be in Davos anymore. one way or another. Now he realizes that's silly. But yeah, so apparently it took about 2 weeks. And it's interesting that it depended on whether the Italian ocean liners were sailing. So he was somehow sending his letters through on these boats. I don't know if that was how the regular post went or if he had a contact that he was sending him that way. So then I'll begin at the beginning. Apparently he'd been with Polly and he'd been with Maria in Torquay. Is that the place in Britain, or is it someplace that I'm not familiar with in the south of France? He'd been there with them, and he was very much trying to conceal how badly he was feeling. I don't know if he was trying to conceal that he had tuberculosis. They probably knew that, at least Maria probably knew it, but he was trying to conceal, how far gone he was, and he was far gone. And he must have done a good job of concealing, because it would backfire on him. Because as you'll see in later letters, Maria was telling him, you don't need to be there. And he was trying to convince her over and over again, yes, I do need to be here. I can't even walk downstairs. I'm so weak. I do need to be here. So apparently he had, he had really succeeded in convincing her that he was doing all right. So there's that. And yeah, he says that the worst was when Polly left. He's not talking yet about Polly going to America. That would happen in December, so that was still some months off. And Dmitri had not yet decided that he was going to send Polly to America. So what's happening here is that Polly's going back to school. This would have been the end of August, so Polly would have been on holiday, and then in September he would have gone back to his boarding school, which was near Ascot in Britain. And so we can see that Dmitri is thinking about death. This may be the last time I ever see him again. Double exclamation point. The worst moment. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that I might never see him again. So he had an inkling that he could have died, and the doctor would later tell him, yes, you could easily have died. If you had stayed at the hotel in the south of France, you would have died. They gave him some pretty intensive treatment at first. Pauline. So he saw Maria in Paris before she left for the U.S. and before he left for Chatzalp. They were both going to other countries, and they had dinner at poor Pauline's, and I don't know who Pauline is. Dmitri spells her name in English phonetically, sort of phonetically, Pauleen. I don't know whether it was spelled that way or whether it was the more traditional INE instead of EEN. But if any of you know who Pauline was, then please do let me know, because I have no idea. And it's so interesting that he compares it to going to war in 1914. Not only does he compare it to going to war in 1914, but he says it was worse. So, reading between the lines of this, he was having a really rough time. He describes being scared at night and, thinking he was going to die, and realistically so. Now, he apologizes to his sister for giving her such a graphic account of what was going on with his body, despite how much, tuberculosis was kind of oddly, it was stigmatized, it was wrongly associated with poor people and dirt and uncleanliness, and strongly stigmatized on the other hand. it had also been romanticized. You know, if you had to be, you were an intellectual and an artist, or you had that kind of personality, and it was a beautiful death, you sort of gradually waste away and fade away. Well, you know, the reality was very, very, very different. And this will not be the first time. I do warn you, in his diaries and in his letters, that Dmitri, you know, shares some pretty disgusting details. So one of them is that he's, you know, bringing stuff up constantly. He describes it as rotten, stinking, and weirdly cadaverous. And a lot of times with tuberculosis, so the tuberculosis, if it's the form that causes cavities, which is the form that Dmitri had, it sort of turns your parts of your lung into pulp, into the, kind of this cheese-like material, and you're coughing some of that up. And it also has, Dmitri had co-infections. So other opportunistic infections would come in and inhabit the lungs as well. And so it would produce pus, and that was primarily from these secondary infections. And the doctor, as you'll see, told Dmitri that he had a co-infection with gangrene, which to me, I wonder if that's true, because how could he have survived that? But anyway, he was spitting up really, really nasty stuff, and he's letting his sister know about that. Now, he's using, and he's also making allusion, I think, to Chekhov when he says, "The time has come to lay down my fevered head." Well, Dmitri always had this poetic side to himself from childhood. So that could have been his own writing, but I think it's a literary allusion. I think it's possibly an allusion to Chekhov. I'm not sure. If any of you know that, please let me know. And then you see him using some very explicitly New Thought language. The everlasting power of good, the pulling through. All of this goes specifically to his New Thought reading, which he started doing after the revolution in 1917. And he was reading books like one by a man named Ralph Waldo Trine, In Tune with the Infinite. You can find it. It's cheap on a Kindle version on the internet. Ralph Waldo Trine, In Tune with the Infinite. Did I say In Tune with the Internet? Anyway, so he's using the language that he used from, and the ideas that he used from Trine and other New Thought sources. And the idea was that disease was an illusion, and that if you have these sort of mantras, these positive thought mantras, and you're saying, I will pull through, then you're going to survive it. And in fact, if you don't succeed in doing that, then you're to blame for your own death. That's the downside of what Trine was writing. He actually says that explicitly in Tune with the Infinite. If you have a disease, and if you succumb to the disease, it's because of your own negative thinking. So thanks for that, Mr. Trine. And Dmitri he's going back and forth. First, I'm going to do everything to pull through, but then I was gripped by fear, so it's not so easy, is it? And then he goes back to the New Thought again. I was gripped by fear, but then I have that strange and blind feeling that the everlasting power of good will pull me through. And he's going to think it's important for him to write these things down, because it's sort of proof to the universe that that he's on board with the positive thinking. Now, what the heck does he mean by pump on it? If this was in Russian, I would say, well, okay, it's a Russian idiom that I don't understand. But it certainly isn't an English idiom, and he's writing this in English. I will pull through. It will pull me through. If only I never leave for 1 second, either to pump on it or let myself slip into a state of apathy and indifference. So by leave, I don't think he means leaving the sanatorium. I think he's committed to that. I think he means leaving off with the positive thinking. And what pump on it means, only he could tell us. And then he makes this very, very interesting reference to the fact that he had been on the Red Sea. Several countries border the Red Sea. I'm assuming that he was in Egypt when he was a young man in 1918 and went to Egypt. He just absolutely loved it. So I'm assuming he was in Egypt. He made some kind of trip there. When would that have been? Because we pretty much know what in 38 he was in Germany, he was in Greece. It must have been earlier in 39. And he went to the Red Sea and he met with what he calls a Hindu doctor. He doesn't say a yogi, he doesn't say a swami, he says a doctor. But that's unclear because he's talking about it in connection to New Thought, and that these New Thought ideas, something of the sort of what I've just been describing, the power of good, the everlasting power of good, was put into my soul by the Hindu doctor. So it doesn't sound like he was a sort of conventional medical practitioner. He may have been a medical practitioner doing, I don't know, homeopathy or traditional Indian, what do they call that? Ayurveda or something like that? I don't know. Anyway, he is definitely was ministering to the soul as well as taking care of the body. And so I'm still looking for any way to find out, about this trip that Dmitri took, presumably to English, and this Hindu doctor that he met with. Fascinating stuff. So what do we have next time? Well, next time he's going to describe to Maria, in a fascinating way, his departure from Paris on the very eve of the Second World War. And everybody was waiting for this horrible thing to happen. Everybody knew it was coming. And that, of course, contributed to Dmitri's anxiety greatly. Anyway, I've gone way too long with this. Next time I'll try and do a smaller section of the letter, but I hope you found it interesting, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.